Zarek's exoskeletal digits danced across the quantum resonance interface, attempting to verify the impossibility before him. The human vessel's signature defied every known classification in the Syndicate's extensive sinological database. Most troubling was its origin, a region of space that had been marked as a dead zone for nearly 3 generations. The monitoring station itself was a marvel of Syndicate engineering, suspended in the electromagnetic turbulence of the Veil Nebula. Epsilon 9 represented the pinnacle of long-range surveillance technology, with sensory arrays that could detect the quantum flutter of a single electron across light-years of space. Yet today, those same arrays seemed to be feeding information that challenged everything Zarek understood about galactic cartography. Verify spatial coordinates, he barked to his junior communications specialist, a young Syndicate operative named Krell. The holographic displays flickered, casting prismatic shadows across the station's obsidian-like control room. Multiple quantum-entangled scanners confirmed the reading. A vessel of unmistakably human origin was moving through a sector that should have been impossible to traverse. The star charts told a different story. This region was a graveyard of civilizations, a cosmic debris field scarred by ancient stellar conflicts. Gravitational anomalies, quantum disruption zones, and radiation levels that would obliterate most known ship designs made this sector a navigational nightmare. No species had successfully mapped this region in over 7 centuries. Yet here was the human vessel, gliding through the cosmic minefield as if navigating a calm planetary orbit. Krell's voice trembled slightly. Quantum signature is unusual. It's not just penetrating the interference. It appears to be harmonizing with the background radiation. This was more than mere technological achievement. It suggested an understanding of fundamental physical principles that went beyond conventional engineering. Zarek's communication implant began receiving priority transmissions from the Syndicate Central Command. The quantum-encrypted messages revealed a growing sense of unease among the highest echelons of galactic leadership. Humanity had been considered a containment issue, a species too volatile, too unpredictable to be granted full interstellar recognition. Their last known diplomatic interaction had ended in what the official records called a categorical misunderstanding, a diplomatic euphemism that masked a far more complex history. The station's Synorcatal database began pulling historical records. Humanity's initial interstellar attempts had been brief and seemingly chaotic. Multiple first contact scenarios had ended in unexpected ways, not through military conflict, but through a form of technological and cultural engagement that defied standard diplomatic protocols. One archived report caught Zarek's attention, a human diplomatic mission to the Centauri Concordance that had begun as a standard cultural exchange and ended with the complete restructuring of the Concordance's entire social and technological infrastructure. No weapons were used. No traditional diplomatic channels were followed. The humans had simply existed, and everything around them changed. The quantum comm array began receiving additional data streams, fragments of communication protocols, snippets of technological handshakes that seemed to be probing the very fabric of spacetime itself. It was as if the human vessel was simultaneously communicating, mapping, and potentially restructuring the fundamental quantum landscape of the sector. "Patch me through to Central Command," Zarek commanded, his typically calm demeanor showing the first hints of genuine concern. The humans were not just entering the sector. They were transforming it. Krell's younger perspective caught something Zarek initially missed. "Sir, the vessel's quantum signature. It's not just moving through the sector. It's interacting with it. Look at these quantum coherence patterns." The holographic display revealed something extraordinary. Where most vessels would create disturbances in the quantum field, this human ship seemed to be creating a form of quantum harmony. It was as if the very space around the vessel was being gently reorganized, quantum uncertainties being resolved with each moment of its passage. This was beyond exploration, beyond technology. This was something else entirely. Zarek realized that the warning wasn't just about a human warship being detected. It was a harbinger of something far more profound, a fundamental challenge to everything the Syndicate understood about space, technology, and the nature of interstellar existence. "Prepare full spectrum analysis," he said quietly, "and inform Central Command. Whatever is coming, it's nothing like anything we've ever encountered before." The U.S. Defiant's internal ecosystem hummed with a complexity that defied traditional starship design. Captain Marcus Reyes wasn't seated in a conventional command chair, but integrated within a neural interface that blurred the lines between human consciousness and technological system. Dr. Aria Chen, the ship's chief xenodynamics researcher, stood near the holographic projection table, her fingers tracing intricate patterns of quantum probability maps. The Defiant wasn't just a vessel of exploration. It was a living research platform that challenged every conventional understanding of interstellar travel. Quantum resonance stabilization at 87.3%, announced Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the ship's lead quantum systems engineer. His voice carried a mix of scientific excitement and calculated precision. The team represented a cross-section of human innovation, each member selected not just for their technical expertise, but for their ability to think beyond established paradigms. The ship's origin was itself a story of improbability. Constructed in the subterranean research facilities beneath the Atacama Desert, the Defiant represented the culmination of humanity's most radical technological research. It was born from a collaboration that defied traditional military scientific boundaries, a project that merged quantum physics, biological systems engineering, and a uniquely human approach to problem-solving. Aria's current research focused on what she called quantum contextual adaptation. Traditional alien technologies approached space travel as a problem of navigation and protection. Humans saw it differently, as a dynamic conversation with the universe itself. The Defiant's hull was composed of a metamaterial that was more akin to a living organism than a traditional ship's skin. "We're approaching the first quantum instability zone," Michael announced. On any other vessel, this would have been a moment of extreme tension. Here, it was an opportunity. Captain Rice closed his eyes, interfacing directly with the ship's neural network. The neural link was a recent breakthrough, a technology that allowed human consciousness to become a direct computational component. He wasn't controlling the ship so much as he was becoming part of its decision-making process. The ship's historical archives played silently in a corner of the bridge's holographic display. Footage from humanity's early space exploration flickered, grainy images of Apollo missions, the first Mars rovers, the initial interstellar probes. Each image represented not just technological milestones, but a fundamental human trait: relentless curiosity coupled with an inability to accept limitations. Dr. Chen's latest research suggested that the quantum instability zones were more than just areas of physical disruption. They were, in her words, cosmic information nodes, regions where the fundamental rules of physics became more fluid, more negotiable, where most species saw danger. Humans saw an unexplored frontier. "Quantum entanglement stabilizers engaging," Michael reported. The ship's systems weren't just defending against the zone's potential hazards. They were actively sampling, analyzing, learning. A subtle alarm triggered, not a warning of danger, but an indication of opportunity. The Defiant sensors had detected something unexpected, a subtle quantum signature that didn't match any known galactic mapping. "Captain," Aria called out, her voice rising with a mixture of scientific excitement and professional restraint. "We're detecting remnant quantum threads. These look like navigation markers, but they're not from any known civilization." The bridge crew understood the implication. These weren't just random quantum fluctuations. They were deliberate information structures left behind by something, or someone, that understood the fabric of space-time in a way that transcended conventional understanding. Captain Reyes opened his eyes, the neural interface creating a slight phosphorescent glow around his temples. "Prepare full-spectrum quantum analysis and initiate first-contact communication protocols." The communication protocols were nothing like traditional diplomatic approaches. They were more akin to a complex mathematical dialogue, a way of establishing contact that didn't rely on language, but on fundamental information exchange. Michael's fingers danced across the quantum interface, initiating quantum handshake sequence. Probability matrices are stabilizing. The Defiant wasn't just passing through the quantum instability zone. It was engaging with it, transforming it, turning a region of cosmic chaos into a readable, interactive information space. Dr. Chen watched the quantum probability map with a sense of wonder that never diminished, no matter how many times she witnessed it. This was what set humans apart, the ability to see potential where others saw only risk. Quantum thread coherence at 62%, Michael announced. We're establishing contact. On the bridge of the U.S. Defiant, another impossible conversation was about to begin. The Alien Interceptor Squadron, designated Swarm Unit Epsilon 7, represented the pinnacle of Syndicate military engineering. 12 vessels moved in perfect geometric synchronization, their hulls constructed from a metamorphic alloy that could instantaneously reconfigure based on computational threat assessments. Fleet Commander Vornak watched the human vessel through multiple sensory interfaces, his multiple sensory stalks quivering with a mixture of professional curiosity and deep-seated apprehension. The Syndicate's military doctrine was built on generations of computational warfare, where conflict was reduced to mathematical probability and strategic algorithmic engagement. Initiate standard containment protocol, Vornak commanded, his voice resonating through the fleet's neural network. Each interceptor began to emit a complex quantum interference pattern designed to destabilize any incoming vessel's navigational systems. It was a technique that had neutralized hundreds of potential threats across multiple galactic sectors. What the Syndicate didn't understand was that neutralization meant something entirely different to humans. The first wave of quantum interference struck the U.S. Defiant. On most vessels, this would have created immediate navigational chaos, a cascade of system failures that would leave a ship vulnerable. Instead, the human vessel seemed to absorb the interference. Dr. Aria Chen watched the incoming quantum patterns with a scientist's precision. They're using a multi-dimensional interference technique, she murmured to Michael Rodriguez. Classic containment strategy from species with hierarchical computational models. Michael's fingers danced across the quantum interface, initiating adaptive resonance protocol. It wasn't a defensive maneuver in the traditional sense. It was more like a complex musical response, taking the incoming quantum waves and transforming them into something entirely unexpected. Inside the Syndicate's command vessel, holographic displays began to show something unprecedented. The human ship wasn't just resisting the interference. It was actively reinterpreting the quantum signals. Where the Syndicate expected system disruption, they were receiving complex data structures that seemed to be communicating. Fleet Commander Vornak's secondary sensory cluster detected an anomaly. The quantum interference wasn't just being deflected, it was being transformed into a form of communication. It was as if the human vessel was taking the Syndicate's attack and turning it into a dialogue. Impossible, muttered the fleet's lead quantum strategist. The incoming data didn't conform to any known communication protocol. It wasn't encryption. It wasn't a weapon. It was something else entirely. A fluid, adaptive form of interaction that seemed to challenge the very concept of hostile engagement. Captain Marcus Reyes understood something fundamental that most alien civilizations missed. Conflict wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about communication, about finding common ground in the most unexpected circumstances. The Defiant's neural interface began to construct a complex response. Not a weapon, not a defensive barrier, but a quantum-level invitation to understand. Dr. Chen's research had revealed something profound about interstellar communication. Most species approached first contact as a binary problem, friend or foe, threat or opportunity. Humans saw it as a multidimensional conversation, where even an apparent attack could be a form of communication. Quantum resonance stabilizing, Michael announced. The ship's systems were doing something remarkable. They were taking the Syndicate's interference pattern and using it to create a complex informational structure. On the Syndicate vessels, junior communication specialists began to notice something strange. The quantum interference they were generating was being reflected back, not as a weapon, not as a defense, but as a form of intricate, multilayered information. Fleet Commander Vornak felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service: genuine uncertainty. "Hold engagement," he commanded, his voice carrying a mixture of professional caution and scientific curiosity. The human vessel wasn't behaving like any threat they had ever encountered. It was transforming the very nature of their approach to conflict. The space between the Syndicate interceptors and the U.S. Defiant became something more than a potential battlefield. It became a canvas of quantum possibility, a region where the traditional rules of engagement were being rewritten in real time. "Preparing full spectrum analysis," Vornak said quietly. Whatever was happening, it was clear that this encounter would change everything they understood about interstellar conflict. The human vessel continued its approach, turning what should have been a moment of potential destruction into an unprecedented dialogue. Deep within the quantum-shielded communications hub of Syndicate Central Command, a crisis was unfolding. The initial encounter between the human vessel and Fleet Commander Vornak's interceptors had triggered a cascading series of analytical protocols that were pushing the limits of their computational infrastructure. Diplomatic analyst Krentok reviewed the incoming data streams, her neural implants working overtime to process the unprecedented information. The human vessel's response wasn't just a technological anomaly. It was a complete reimagining of interspecies communication. "The quantum signature is evolving," she muttered to her colleague, senior strategist Zolrin. "It's not static. Each microsecond, the data structure is adapting." Zolrin's physiological response monitors revealed something extraordinary. The data wasn't just information. It was alive in a way that defied their understanding of communication. Where the Syndicate's systems expected fixed protocols, the human transmission created dynamic, self-modifying information pathways. Meanwhile, aboard the U.S. Defiant, the encounter was being processed through an entirely different lens. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in xenocultural dynamics, was analyzing the Syndicate's response with a combination of scientific rigor and human intuition. "Look at the communication topology," she said, pointing to a holographic representation that looked more like a living organism than a traditional data map. "They're trying to categorize our transmission using hierarchical processing models. We're giving them something closer to a living ecosystem." The ship's cultural interface, a breakthrough technology that combined linguistic analysis, historical context, and predictive modeling, was doing something remarkable. It wasn't just translating. It was creating a dynamic bridge of understanding. Captain Marcus Reyes watched the interaction with a calm that belied the complexity of what was happening. The neural interface allowed him to perceive the encounter on multiple levels, simultaneously: strategic, technological, and almost biological. In the research archives of human diplomatic history, this moment would be studied for generations. It wasn't just a first contact scenario. It was a fundamental challenge to how intelligent species conceptualize communication, conflict, and mutual understanding. Zolrin's computational analysis began to break down. The human transmission was introducing variables that their most advanced systems couldn't process. It was as if the data itself was alive, mutating, responding, creating new pathways of understanding with each passing moment. "We're detecting recursive information patterns," Krentok reported, her voice a mixture of professional detachment and genuine wonder. "The transmission isn't just sending information. It's creating a collaborative knowledge space." Dr. Rodriguez understood something profound. Humans didn't see communication as a transfer of fixed information. They saw it as a living, breathing process of mutual discovery. The Defiant's cultural interface began introducing elements that went beyond traditional communication. Fragments of human art, scientific discoveries, philosophical concepts, not as a display of superiority, but as an invitation to a deeper form of understanding. Aboard the Syndicate vessels, junior analysts began to experience something unprecedented. The human transmission was creating cognitive resonance patterns that challenged their fundamental understanding of information processing. "It's like the data is breathing," one young analyst whispered, her neural implants struggling to process the incoming transmission. "We're not being invaded, we're being invited." Captain Reyes recognized this moment for what it was, not a potential conflict, but an opportunity for genuine connection. The human approach wasn't about domination or submission. It was about transformation. The space between the vessels became more than a physical divide. It transformed into a living information gradient, a region where the traditional boundaries between species, between communication and conflict, began to dissolve. Zollran's computational systems reached a critical point. The human transmission was introducing concepts that didn't just challenge their understanding. They were fundamentally reshaping it. "We're detecting recursive empathy protocols," Krentok reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're not just communicating. They're attempting to create a shared cognitive space." As the encounter continued, it became clear that something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't just a first contact scenario. It was the beginning of a fundamental reimagining of interspecies communication. The universe watched, poised on the edge of a transformative moment. The research station orbiting the defunct colony of New Horizon had been forgotten by most of the galaxy. Established during humanity's initial interstellar expansion, it now served as a silent witness to the unfolding encounter. Dr. Camille Noack, the station's sole permanent resident, watched the developing situation with a mixture of professional curiosity and deep historical understanding. Unlike most contemporary researchers, Noack specialized in xenorchaeological systems theory, a discipline that studied the broader patterns of interspecies interactions throughout galactic history. His primary research focused on what he called civilizational phase transitions, moments when species fundamentally transformed their approach to technological and social development. The current encounter between the human vessel and the Syndicate represented precisely such a moment. The station's ancient communication arrays, originally designed for deep space monitoring, began to resonate with unexpected activity. These weren't just standard quantum communications. They were something more, a complex informational ecosystem that seemed to be reconfiguring the very fabric of interstellar communication. "Quantum coherence is increasing," muttered the station's AI companion, an advanced system named ARIA, Adaptive Resonance Informational Assistant. "Current transmission patterns suggest a fundamental restructuring of communication topology." Noack understood something most missed. This wasn't just a technological encounter. It was a cognitive evolution happening in real time. The station's historical archives began to compile a comprehensive analysis. Humanity's previous encounters with alien civilizations had never followed conventional diplomatic patterns. Each interaction had been a unique process of mutual transformation, rather than a traditional exchange of information or resources. Deep within the station's quantum archives, a complex narrative began to emerge. The human approach wasn't about conquest or even communication in the traditional sense. It was about creating shared cognitive spaces, transforming potential conflict into opportunities for mutual understanding. Aria's advanced analysis systems began to generate predictive models. The current encounter had a probability matrix that defied traditional strategic calculations. Where most species saw potential conflict, humans were creating collaborative information networks. "Fascinating," Dr. Noack murmured, reviewing the emerging data patterns. "They're not just communicating. They're creating a living information ecosystem." The station's long-forgotten research modules began to activate. Experimental communication technologies that had been dormant for decades suddenly hummed with unexpected life. These were technologies developed during humanity's most innovative period, systems that viewed communication as a dynamic, living process. On the Syndicate vessels, the encounter was pushing their most advanced analytical systems to their absolute limits. Their computational models, built on hierarchical and linear processing, were struggling to comprehend the fluid, adaptive nature of human communication. Aria's predictive model suggested something profound. This encounter wasn't just about two species meeting. It was about a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could interact. Dr. Nowak accessed the station's deepest archives, records from humanity's earliest interstellar explorations. Each encounter told a similar story. Humans didn't approach new civilizations with predetermined agendas. They approached with a fundamental openness, a willingness to be transformed by the encounter itself. The quantum communication pattern suggested a cognitive approach that was simultaneously scientific, artistic, and deeply empathetic. It was as if the human vessel was creating a living bridge between different modes of understanding. Quantum resonance reaching critical complexity, Aria announced. The station's systems were detecting something unprecedented, a form of communication that was simultaneously a method of exploration, scientific research, and cultural exchange. Historical records began to overlay the current encounter. Previous human interactions with alien civilizations hadn't been about technological or territorial expansion. They had been about creating shared understanding, transforming potential conflict into collaborative potential. Dr. Nowak realized he was witnessing a moment that would be studied for generations. This wasn't just a first contact scenario. It was a demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to interstellar interaction. The research station continued its silent vigil, a forgotten outpost suddenly at the center of a transformative moment in galactic history. The universe held its breath, poised on the edge of a profound transformation. The Syndicate's High Council chambers descended into a state of controlled chaos. Holographic projections flickered with data streams that defied traditional analytical models, while senior representatives from multiple subspecies struggled to comprehend the unfolding situation. Councillor Rentok Val, the eldest member of the diplomatic corps, leaned forward with a complexity of emotion that transcended her species' typical stoic demeanor. The encounter with the human vessel had triggered something far beyond a simple first contact scenario. The computational models are breaking down, announced Chief Analyst Zormal, his multiple sensory appendages trembling with a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. The data from the human vessel wasn't just challenging their understanding. It was systematically dismantling the foundational assumptions of Syndicate intelligence protocols. Deep within the Council's most secure data vaults, a historical archive began to activate. Buried records of previous species that had encountered similar paradigm-shifting interactions emerged. Civilizations that had either adapted or been fundamentally transformed by unexpected encounters. Captain Marcus Reyes understood this moment for what it was, not a conquest, but an invitation. The U.S. Defiant wasn't just a vessel. It was a living testament to humanity's most profound approach to exploration. Transformation through mutual understanding. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at a holographic interface, her fingers tracing complex data patterns that seemed to breathe and pulse with living intelligence. The human approach wasn't about presenting information. It was about creating a collaborative knowledge space that invited participation. The council chamber fell into an unusual silence as the full implications began to emerge. This wasn't a military encounter. It wasn't a diplomatic mission. It was something entirely unprecedented, a form of interaction that existed between the traditional boundaries of conflict and cooperation. Zormel's latest analysis revealed something extraordinary. The human transmission was introducing conceptual frameworks that didn't just challenge the Syndicate's understanding. They were providing tools for entirely new modes of thinking. "We're detecting recursive knowledge transfer protocols," he reported, his voice a mixture of professional detachment and genuine wonder. It's as if the transmission itself is a form of collaborative learning. Outside the council chambers, news of the encounter began to spread through the Syndicate's communication networks. Junior researchers, diplomatic assistants, and communication specialists found themselves confronted with a fundamental reimagining of interspecies interaction. The Defiant's cultural interface was doing something remarkable. It wasn't just sharing information, it was creating a living bridge of understanding. Fragments of human knowledge began to flow. Scientific discoveries, artistic expressions, philosophical concepts that challenged linear modes of thinking. Counselor Ren Tak Val recognized the profound nature of the moment. This wasn't about technological superiority or territorial expansion. It was about a fundamental approach to existence, a way of understanding that saw potential where others saw boundaries. Historical archives began to reveal a pattern. Humanity's previous interactions with alien civilizations had never followed conventional diplomatic or military models. Each encounter had been a unique process of mutual transformation, of finding common ground in the most unexpected places. The space around the Defiant began to shimmer with a complex quantum resonance, a living information gradient that challenged the very concept of physical and cognitive boundaries. "We're detecting emergent communication patterns," reported a junior analyst, her voice trembling with excitement. "It's not just information transfer. It's a form of collective intelligence generation." Dr. Rodriguez understood the deeper significance. Humans didn't see communication as a fixed process. They saw it as a living, breathing ecosystem of mutual discovery, a continuous process of becoming. The Syndicate High Council found itself at a crossroads. The encounter was forcing them to confront fundamental questions about the nature of intelligence, communication, and collective understanding. As the holographic projections continued to display the complex data streams, one thing became increasingly clear: nothing would remain the same after this moment. The universe watched, holding its breath at the precipice of a profound transformation. The Frontier Research Outpost on Nexus Prime had long been considered a diplomatic wasteland, a collection point for species too marginalized to find representation in the Syndicate's primary governance structures. Researchers, refugees, and independent explorers from hundreds of different civilizations coexisted in a delicate ecosystem of survival and mutual tolerance. Dr. Aria Chen's transmission caught the attention of Karax, the station's chief information broker, a being whose species had evolved beyond traditional physical form, existing now as a complex network of quantum-entangled consciousness nodes. "The transmission isn't just information," Karax explained to a gathering of station residents, each representing a species that had been overlooked or deliberately marginalized by the Syndicate's central power structures. "It's a form of systemic liberation." The station's diverse inhabitants represented the galaxy's forgotten margins, species that had been technologically suppressed, culturally isolated, or economically pushed to the periphery. They understood something fundamental that the Syndicate's central powers had forgotten. True innovation comes from the edges, not the center. A Vril refugee named Scientok approached the Transmission Analysis Center. Her species had been systematically displaced by multiple galactic conflicts, reduced to a scattered diaspora of scientific and cultural refugees. She recognized something in the human transmission that resonated deeply: a fundamental approach to existence that valued potential over predetermined limitations. "Look at the transmission's structural integrity," she said, her crystalline communication appendages dancing across the analysis interface. "It's not a message. It's an invitation." The station's independent researchers began to compile their own analysis. Unlike the Syndicate's centralized research networks, this was a collaborative effort that drew from hundreds of different technological and cultural perspectives. Professor Malik, a xenoanthropologist from a species that had survived multiple galactic extinction events, saw something profound in the human transmission. "This is how resilient civilizations communicate," he observed, "not through dominance, but through radical openness." Karax's quantum consciousness began to map the transmission's deeper patterns. What appeared chaotic was, in fact, an incredibly sophisticated communication protocol that adapted in real time to different cognitive frameworks. The station's diverse inhabitants represented something the Syndicate had systematically overlooked: the power of marginal perspectives. Each species brought a unique approach to understanding, a different lens through which to interpret the unprecedented transmission. A group of young researchers from a recently contacted civilization began to collaborate in ways that defied traditional research protocols. They weren't just analyzing the transmission. They were actively participating in its ongoing generation. "It's alive," whispered a junior researcher, her sensory tendrils vibrating with excitement. The transmission is a living system of knowledge generation. The human approach revealed itself not as a technological demonstration, but as a fundamental philosophy of existence. Each piece of shared information was an invitation to collaborative understanding, a way of seeing potential where others saw only difference. Scientok's analysis revealed something extraordinary. The transmission contained embedded learning protocols that actively adjusted to the cognitive frameworks of different species. It wasn't just sharing information. It was creating a dynamic, adaptive knowledge ecosystem. Professor Malik recognized the deeper significance. This was how truly advanced civilizations communicated, not through fixed information transfer, but through creating shared spaces of mutual discovery. The station's independent research network began to generate predictive models. The human transmission was introducing conceptual frameworks that could potentially reshape entire systems of galactic governance, technological development, and cultural understanding. Carax's quantum consciousness reached a critical point of analysis. This is beyond communication, the entity announced to the gathered researchers. This is a fundamental reimagining of collective intelligence. The Frontier Outpost became a focal point of something extraordinary. Where the Syndicate saw a potential threat, these marginalized researchers saw an unprecedented opportunity for collective transformation. As the transmission continued to pulse through the station's complex communication networks, one thing became increasingly clear. The universe was about to change in ways no one could have predicted. The margins of galactic civilization watched, holding their collective breath at the precipice of a profound awakening. The Galactic Archives, located in the neutral space between multiple star systems, represented the collective memory of thousands of civilizations. Its quantum crystalline data cores preserved the most significant moments of interstellar history, and now they prepared to record something unprecedented. Curator Xena, a being whose existence spanned multiple dimensional planes, watched as the final data streams from the human syndicate encounter coalesced. This was more than a first contact scenario. This was a fundamental shift in galactic understanding. Captain Marcus Reyes stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defiant, his neural interface humming with the collective experience of the encounter. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked beside him, analyzing the final moments of their extraordinary interaction. The transmission wasn't ending. It was evolving. Diplomatic records from hundreds of civilizations began to activate, cross-referencing the current encounter with historical precedents. But there were no true precedents. This was something entirely new. On the Frontier Research Outpost, Carax's quantum consciousness began to synthesize the broader implications. The human transmission had done something remarkable. It had created a living bridge of understanding that transcended traditional communication barriers. The Syndicate's High Council found themselves in uncharted territory. Their most advanced analytical systems were still struggling to comprehend the full depth of the encounter. What had begun as a potential conflict had transformed into something far more profound. Deep space monitoring stations across multiple star systems picked up residual quantum signatures, complex information structures that seemed to continue evolving even after the direct encounter had concluded. Dr. Kamal Noak's research station began compiling a comprehensive analysis. This wasn't just a moment of first contact. It was a demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to interstellar existence, one that viewed communication as a living, adaptive process. The U.S. Defiant began to prepare for its next phase of exploration. But this was no ordinary mission. The vessel carried with it the echoes of a transformative encounter, a living testament to humanity's approach to the unknown. Scientok, the Vrel refugee, understood something profound. The transmission was more than information. It was an invitation to a different way of existing, a mode of interaction that saw potential in difference rather than threat. Galactic communication networks began to shift. The human transmission introduced conceptual frameworks that challenged fundamental assumptions about intelligence, communication, and collective understanding. The space around the Defiant continued to shimmer with quantum resonance, a living information gradient that suggested something extraordinary was still unfolding. Curator Zena's archival systems processed the encounter with a perspective that spanned millennia. This was a rare moment, a true paradigm shift in galactic consciousness. It's not about what was communicated, Zena noted to an assistant, but how the communication happened. The Syndicate's marginalized species began to see new possibilities. Where previously they had been silenced or overlooked, the human transmission created spaces for voices that had long been suppressed. Captain Reyes understood that this was just the beginning. The encounter wasn't an endpoint, but a threshold, an invitation to a broader, more inclusive way of understanding the universe. Dr. Rodriguez's final analysis revealed something profound. The transmission wasn't just sharing information. It was creating a collaborative ecosystem of knowledge, where every interaction was an opportunity for mutual growth. The Defiant began to move, preparing for its next exploration. But it carried with it something far more significant than technological capabilities. It carried a way of approaching the unknown, with curiosity, openness, and a fundamental belief in collective potential. Across the galaxy, civilizations began to reconsider their approach to exploration, communication, and understanding. The human encounter had introduced something revolutionary, a way of existing that saw boundaries as opportunities and differences as sources of strength. The universe continued to expand, holding its breath at the precipice of a new understanding. Humanity had arrived, not with conquest, but with an invitation.